Hello. So I have been introduced already. So as said, I work in NaturalMotion at the moment, part of the Zynga family, which I'm so happy to work there because it fills my dreams of working in the video game industry. I'm not going to do in any other sort of presentation, just working since 10 years in the industry, worked in many industry and user researcher, as in the academia and applied research, as in-house designers in startup and in corporate, and now in a smaller corporate compared to IBM, where I was working in the last 5 years. So let's start with a question. I want to start with a story. Would you ask a pastry chef to add more baking powder to the cake batter, only purely based on the fact that you don't like the cake mix? You go there, you try it before baking it, you say, I don't like it, can you change something? So, good news, it's your wedding. And you want to plan your wedding, you want your wedding to be perfect, starting from the venue, starting from the dress of the bride, the dress of the, of the other bride of the male, who knows. And obviously the cake. You want a massive cake, but you want that to be perfect for everybody. And it turns out that Granny is a diabetic, Mom is allergic to chocolate, sister-in-law is vegan, and Auntie is colorblind. You know, this auntie raised me, so I want her just to perceive the experience in the best way. You go to the pastry chef is very famous, you have money, you don't mind. You go to this person, you say, look, I have this problem, I want a cake that can be eaten by everybody, and I want this experience to be amazing for everybody. The pastry chef is a professional. So it would be like, no worry, actually, I'm going to ask you a few more questions. What are the details of the bride dress? Because maybe if you have to play with colors, we can match it. How is the venue? What type of party it is? Is a day party, night party, friendly party? What are your cake preferences? So this pastry chef is doing research, a wider research, not only on the product, but on the experience in itself. A bit more service design thing. And then it continues showing the portfolio of cake. These are my jobs, and these are my idea, talking out loud about ingredients and taste combination. And then you start talking and you agree on some some kind of cake based on the previous requirements, minimum requirements that you set for the cake. And then you arrive to produce some minimum viable cake, which is low carb. Low carb because for diabetic reason, you cannot increase the glycemic level. No chocolate, no eggs and milk for vegan people. Fruits to sweeten. So, I mean, we are going to make a sweet cake by using like natural sugar, not using any added sugar. Aesthetic is discussed because in a minimum viable cake, you can play with colors, but you cannot play about, how big it is, layers, like small character that we are going to put on the top. But you agree on many things, and maybe you are going to draw it, and you agree on how the aesthetic will look like. The first sample is done, you try and say, it's good, but... And then you have an amazing idea. You know what, I have time, do you? Because we can bake together, so I can provide feedback on the moment, and we can iterate so many times. And the pastry chef is like, well, okay, I have time. So let's do, you are a good client. There are so many requirements that will make this cake cost so much money. And you have so many contacts, so you're a good customer for the cake, for the pastry chef. So I said, well, okay, worst error ever. Because then, while you are in the kitchen with the pastry chef, you try the cake mix. You know the cake mix when you're like, you put the eggs, you put the flour, all the ingredients, and blah, 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 even before putting it on the oven, you try it. And you're like, it's not as sweet as I thought. Why don't we add some stevia? I know that stevia is fine as a sweetener and doesn't hurt any diabetic people, which is true, actually. Then plus stevia, change request. Then that's the best sentence ever. This mix is not going to raise properly. I know it because I do banana loaf quite often at home. I'm not an expert. But in my opinion, plus baking powder, I know that Mom is allergic to chocolate. can we make it more chocolatey? It's like when they tell you, oh, can you make this font bigger and nicer, but not that big and not that round? I heard that this type of nuts from Angola make it taste like more chocolatey. I Google it. They're showing their Google. The worst enemy when used against you, your best friend when you serve for your purpose. Another change request. And then another one, you look at in MasterChef, you have a sound knowledge of it. So let's use oil instead of butter because it makes it like less fatty. What's the result? Oh, and then, of course, you start using technical words. So like, can you crimp, can you fold, can you beat? Actually, in any job, specific terminology indicates specific actions in a specific point in time in the process. You cannot say, can you crimp the eggs? Because you beat the eggs, and you beat the eggs after having done something else. So the poor chef is totally confused by that. He's not understanding anymore what you want from him. Okay, you bake it, and this is the outcome. It turns out that the stevia is a sweetener, it's good for diabetics, but it has a taste of licorice. It's an aftertaste. It's normal for this ingredient. Baking powder, it made it too raised, so too much air in the composition. People that are allergic to chocolate maybe are allergic to other nuts. Actually, these new nuts from Angola were never tested because normally when you do allergic test, you test only for the things that are in your country. So it can raise some allergy. And oil makes the cake denser and moister. This is not a wedding cake. Does it sound familiar, this? So this is like an example of a typical project. When you set the requirement, the pastry chef did his job, did all the research, you design a concept, and then you do an MVP, and there are some change requests, which is fine, and then you have the outcome, and you iterate. The thing is, when you are in production and you are physically doing that, you shouldn't add any change requests. Because it's going to change the outcome. At least you should propose them later. Okay, does it sound familiar? And now we know, okay, let's try to understand what is happening here. We all have worked in many projects, in many processes, in many companies. And this is the standard UX design process, the typical user-centered design thinking. It has been labeled in so many times, it's all the same thing. Research, design, prototype, evaluate, iterate. Obviously, sometimes you enter in a project where the research has been done already, or there is no budget, so you not always jump in the perfect time or in the perfect step, and not all the steps are covered. But what happens most of the time? You are a prototype monkey. So the only part that for many companies, and this reflects in the UX maturity of the company that we are going to talk about later, is that they see you have amazing skills, you are able to research, you are able to understand the user, you are able to evaluate, but they want you only to do wireframes. And this is wrong. And sometimes these wireframes are not even based on your research or somebody's research. I mean, it doesn't have to be yours, as long as it is done in a proper way. It's made on assumptions, not even involving what is called sponsor users sometimes, which are representative people representing the user. And then, for many years, I was like, there is something wrong. Maybe it's me. I even thought, I'm going to change the job. Maybe this is not for me. And then I had a problem, and the problem was related to the Agile process. Now, there are so many methodologies out there, and there are so many Agile methodologies out there as well. But then the most used is the Scrum, so I thought I will dedicate this talk to using as an example the Scrum framework. And then everybody was talking about the Lean UX, how good it is. Certainly, Scrum has benefits for the company because it delivers, and it delivers fast. And you fail fast, you iterate fast, and you try again. And then I said, okay, let's start with the positive thinking. What's all about Lean UX? So then I read the book many years ago, so I went back to the website of the writer, and I found this amazing conceptualization he did. So you can find it in his Medium, actually. And then he said, okay, the product backlog is the vision, it's outside the sprint, and this is where the designer can input the research, the hypothesis, can help figuring out conceptually how the product will look like or how it will work. And then it did an exercise of mapping all the UX activities or the wider design activities into the sprints and into, let's say, the various steps of each sprint. So I said, okay, in the sprint planning, which is very focused, you are going to decide how the product will look like, what is the main focus and the main problem that you are going to solve for that sprint. You can help them to figure out things doing sketching or doing some kind of brainstorming. And then in the design sprint itself, you can prototype, doing visual designing, UX content, all of the activity that are supported by UX designers. The important thing is to have a UX dedicated in the design sprint. And then you can help in the sprint review the moment when you evaluate the outcomes with the quantitative analysis, qualitative if you have any, and then the design research, like comparing assumption with the results you have. Still, I was not happy. And I was trying to figure out why I find problems in Agile all the time. And I came to the conclusion that it's due to the application. It's not the Agile itself. It's not the Lean UX itself, the one that creates problem. It's how we apply, how we receive it in our organization. So first of all, it's compressed timescale. You don't have time to do all the design activities. Most of the time, I work in sprint of 10 days, or 2 weeks normally. The silo problem is people are so focused in detail, are so focused on the goal for the specific sprint that they lose the full vision. And this leads to the next point, which is a narrow point of view. You are so focused on detail that you lose the wool. What we were about to do, like in the long term. And then the religious application. Sometimes I said, oh, okay, can we modify the sprint in that way because it fits more to our product, our process, and the team? They were like, no. You know, well, you did the Scrum course with that. The Agile Manifesto says, the Agile Manifesto is so general, doesn't say everything and nothing. But this is like one of the problems. So people get so religious. No, sprint 0 doesn't exist, because I was saying, can the design activity start earlier, maybe one sprint earlier? Call it whatever, the way you want. Call it sprint 0. No, sprint 0 doesn't have to exist. I was like, okay, fine. And then MVP restrictions. And this is something that I hated for so long, because MVP most of the time means minimum mediocre design. It's like, why we have to be the one that sacrifice all the time? I guess that one of the reasons is Agile is made for developers, okay? So it's developer-shaped. We are user experience people. We know that whenever you design a process, a product, or whatever, you design with keeping the users in mind. Okay, Agile has been designed keeping in mind only coders, not designers, and it has never been modified. So Lean UX has the merit, at least, to have made the exercise to figure out how to include the two worlds together. And the MVP, not only my opinion, actually, this is like from the Nielsen Normal Group, doesn't do any usability test. It is not the representative of what the design is meant to be. So many times I was like, I know that this feature is not the MVP, but I know that in the future this feature is going to be in the product. So let's leave it in space. Let's consider the dependency. Let's consider the relationship that this feature will have with the feature in the MVP. They were like, no, you cannot think about that. Now MVP is supposed to be an MVP, and it's supposed to be faster. So you don't need to put this problem on the table. What does it mean? That if we design something, we doesn't consider the massive, like the merging system that comes from all the feature in the future, you are like taking out space for that. You are relegating to the side, or maybe they will not fit. Maybe the system will be coded in a way that will be made difficult to integrate the new feature in the current code. The last, and this is connected to the last part, once coded, never change. MVP is supposed to be thrown away. It's a proof of concept most of the time, but once developers code it. They say, oh, we made the effort, blah, blah, blah. Actually, the code is not that bad, so let's keep it, which creates all the dependency problem that I was talking about earlier. And then it's focused on a small set of features rather than the whole, so there is no cohesiveness. And working in MVP, especially when I was working in a startup, has created me so many problems because of that. Because then everything was just an expansion of the MVP, which doesn't mean that it's going to represent what it was supposed to be, like the full representation of the product that we thought. Then I continued to read, and I found that effective Agile UX exists, and the traits are the leadership support. So UX is always included in the decisions. All the UX outcomes are taken into consideration. And the leadership defends you. Every time that you are not in a meeting, the leadership will say, oh, why is not the UX manager? Why is not the UX lead? Why there's not the UX designer is not involved here? Let's call this person. The process has to be flexible, so no religious application. An agile project, the process has to be agile by definition. UX is embedded in teams, so the design deliverables don't come from outside, don't come from, if you consider the sprint and the team in the Scrum team, you have to put a designer inside because there are changes, is agile again by definition, so they need to hear the design point of view of the time, or they may ask for some, I don't know, for some change, some opinion, something. If the designer works outside the Scrum team, the way the Scrum team sees the design deliverables is like something external, something that is imposed. While if the designer is inside, you are stating that you are there, you are a pair, you are going to collaborate all together, you can change it together. As a UX, you are the owner of the design, but you are not able probably to see everything. So working beside developers, product owners, and all the other people that work in the Scrum team helps you to see other points of view that you might have to considerate, and which helps you to amend your design. And then the UX shows leadership. The UX is not passive. The UX is proactive. The UX proposes activity. And this, like, I agree with that in a way. And this also comes from a nice talk I was listening in the Interaction Design Foundation and the Nielsen-Norman group. And this leads to the UX maturity. Okay, so what is the problem at the moment? How UX fit into the process? There are so many processes out there. The most common is the Scrum, the Agile, but there is another layer, if you want, of complexity, which is how is your company educated about UX? I have to say that this is the model from, I don't remember, from Nielsen. But there are so many UX maturity models outside. I just decided to go for Nielsen because it's one of the most famous, as I trust him. And also is more detailed. Well, yeah, you have to trust also. And with the 8th step, I felt that is more detailed than other that had 4 steps or 5 steps. Anyway, the point here is you start from a base where there is hostility toward usability, and that was very common in the 90s where UX didn't exist, or it didn't exist as it is now. And there was this misconception that I can understand the user, I represent the user, or my mom represents the user. So they didn't trust any external thing. They didn't trust heuristics because, I mean, even now, most of the time, I talk to people and they're like, how do you prove me heuristics are true? I'm like, yeah, well, it's common knowledge. It's like, I don't know, any science thing. Did the Big Bang happen? Well, maybe, but, you know, that's some knowledge. Until the very top, where the user-driven corporation, UX is everywhere. There is not only a UX department, but everybody takes into account what UX is, the knowledge we produce, the research, the data, all the information. And in the middle, the most important is the fourth, dedicated UX budget. This is when you can say, finally, UX got into the organization, start to get some trust. But at this point in time, the dedicated UX budget is not stable, can be taken, is not defined, the activities are not defined, they are not objective. But anyway, the point here is, I'm not going to describe all the steps. The point here is that also, in order to find your place as a UX into your organization, you have to figure out what is the knowledge and then helping them to go to the top of the ladder. So what are my takeaways? Actually, this is very related to what I'm doing now. I've been hired by NaturalMotion to build UX into the design process. It is very challenging because in game industry, UX is not as developed as in the mainstream industry. Where in the mainstream industry, have so many tools, the knowledge is more accepted, and also the process in a game design company is slightly different. You have game designers that like overlay a bit the competence of a UX designer. You have producers and PM. Not all the company have it in the mainstream industry. Sometimes you have one, sometimes you have the other. Sometimes you have the Scrum Master that covers everything of the product owner. SMEs don't exist. So all these kind of things. And when they asked me, was like, oh, right, that's amazing. The first thing is like, have the process clear. It's not only me educating them about the UX process, it's understanding how is your process and how we can fit together with those disruption. I didn't mean to arrive in an organization and be, hey, I'm the star, now you have to listen to me, because people would be pissed off. And this is not like you're starting wrongly. So it's like every company is different. You need to understand culture and methodology. Be aware of the company UX knowledge. It comes back to the UX maturity. Understand what is the UX knowledge, how and if this UX knowledge is accepted into the organization. It is broadly or not. Maybe some departments are. For instance, in my experience, when I joined the current company, consumer insight and data analysts were the happiest people ever, because they were like, oh, fuck, amazing. Another person will help us to build experiments, to make assumptions. We can work together. And then we have a person we can come back to that we will understand what we're talking about because we're using data. And then build a strong framework. Once you figure out what is the process that you want to build and the process that the company has, build a new framework that can fit everybody together. And this leads to the next one, building a strong communication process. Another thing I did is like, I am up the stakeholder in the company and I talk to everybody. I introduced myself and I told them, look, this UX, I don't know how you know about it. Let's listen my point of view. I listen whatever you know about UX and what you expect from me. And then I met the chief of production, the chief of PM, the VP, absolutely everybody. And I tried to understand how can we collaborate. At the same time, I built my image and reputation also by introducing myself to the developers. Developers are our best friends, you know that. And then I'm planning a lunch and learn. So like I'm designing a playtest framework that we're going to build together. So we educate each other. I try to understand what they need from me, and I try to build a process that is produce the most valid data as possible. Because this is a side talk, but another thing is like when you do playtesting at a game company, you just, first, you give the device, like play. It's like, you don't give tasks, you don't follow them. You answer questions. It's like, oh, what is it made for? Instead of replying back, what do you think is it made for? They would be, oh, this is made for to do that. They're like, no. And then it is done internally by people that know the project really well and they know it from the inside. So not valid at all. And then, you need to educate. And I partially cover about, like talking now, you need to promote the benefit of UX. So in order for people to accept you and to integrate you in the company, they need to see how their effort to come back towards you is being paid off. So for instance, I came to game developer and say, not only I can help you like reducing your iteration in the design because we can test things earlier, but I can take part of the playtest and while I can build all the playtest protocol and run it with you if you want, you will save that time and you will continue to design. build a common vocabulary. That's one of the most important things for me, and teach and learn about terminology. I need to understand your terminology so I know exactly what you're talking about, and I need to educate you about terminology. And this comes back to the you talking to the pastry chef, mixing random words. I have a nice story about it. A few years ago, I was working with a product manager, I don't know how to define this person, and this person was coming to me saying, look, can you do, I think I was asking for a user journey, but I knew we didn't know a user journey at this point in time. I was like, are you sure, are you sure, are you sure, are you sure? At this point, I was so like, boom, I was like, okay, are you asking me for a user journey? I'm going to do a user journey. And then when I show exactly user journey, it was like, this is what I was talking about. Then please go to educate yourself about terminology, because this has happened so many times. I know that this is like extreme, if you want, but that was my way of educating, because it happened so many times. It was like, okay, next time, if you don't want to waste your time and my time, ask exactly for what you want. If you don't know the word, paraphrase, use the paraphrases, describe it. And that's the thing. I think this is my main thing, to build your space into UX, well, not into UX, into an organization, how to bring UX into your organization. Last thing, if you work in an agile product, establish expectation, work at least one step ahead. Research needs time. Making assumptions, validating them, researching on them needs time. Be part of the Scrum team. As we said, the most you are into the Scrum team, the most iteration you have with the rest of the people, the most points of view you are exposed to, and you will build in a constructive way and knowledge together. And then work with the product owner is very important. The product owner is the ultimate person responsible for the deliverable, which means that they are the people making the decision. You have to help them to make an informed decision. Sometimes you might be sad about some decision. You might not be happy, but these people have another knowledge that you might not have, which is all the business requirements, all the goals, the objectives that the company has set for this person. So it's not about, in ideal work, delivering the best design ever. I wish it was, but the product owner is the responsible of that. So we need the product owner to be our best friend, to understand our outcomes, and to make informed decisions based on that. Thank you.
I kind of want cake now, but that's fine. So we're going to do one quick question. We've just got time for one, and that is, what is the ideal MVP?
Wow.
And I said quick question, then went big. Blame them.
The ideal MVP, I don't think there is an ideal MVP, because every process is different. Sometimes you don't need an MVP. You need an MVP if you need to prove something and to deliver it faster. So sometimes, I guess, if you need to do an MVP that takes into account the future steps. So you ideally integrate the feature even though you don't develop them in the MVP.
That was very quick. That was brilliant. Can we please have a huge round of applause for Antonella Sassu?
Thank you.
Thank you.